This man cannot remain in power.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my latest video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the escalating false flag events happening all over Ukraine and what this could mean for Russia, Europe and the rest of the world, and how NATO and Americans will react. So before I get to that story, I'm going to talk about this story here, which just came out. Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak to be fined over lockdown parties. So those of you who don't know, most of UK was under severe lockdowns and a lot of people were suffering. They were suffering from mental health. They were not allowed to see their loved ones, friends, and a lot of people lost family members, and they were not even allowed to hold funerals. They were not even allowed to see their loved ones if they are passing away in the hospital. So a lot of people were suffering during these lockdowns, and there was a few people who didn't obey by the rules and they got fined, which was rightly so. They got fined, some of them severely fined, about £10,000. Some people were fined, and that's all fine. But then these stories started coming out that Boris Johnson himself and Rishi Sunak were holding parties in number 10 while the rest of UK was suffering from severe lockdown. These guys were having their own parties, flaunting around in the parties, not worrying about any lockdown rules. So it's just one rule for us and another rule for them. If you don't know how Boris behaves in parties, this is a small clip to show you how he behaves in parties after a few drinks. And yes, this is Boris Johnson. This is not a body double. This is Boris Johnson in the flesh, and this is him in his glorious best. And this is also who is supposedly running our country right now.
I'm not sure I can tweet any of this.
My apologies to any Star Wars fans out there, because I'm sure that lady with the lightsaber had completely ruined your childhood and ruined your Star Wars dreams. My Star Wars had already been ruined by Disney, so I guess it doesn't matter for me. Anyway, moving on. So you can imagine Boris and Rishi dancing in the dance floor, both holding a beer in their hands, completely drunk out of their heads. And this is exactly how they're running their country, completely drunk, not having a care in the world, not having a care about all of these British people that are suffering. They are there doing their own thing, flaunting their power and flaunting their wealth. And it's not only these lockdown parties, but you can see how it's one rule for them and another rule for the rest of us. For example, the G7 meeting that was held in Cornwall last year, that was in the middle of severe lockdowns. Anyone that flies in and out of the country has to self-isolate for 14 days. However, all of these leaders coming from all over the world, like Biden and Macron and, many leaders coming from all over the world, none of them had to be self-isolated. None of them had to be self-isolated for 7, 14, not even one day. They were straight down to Cornwall. And you can see from the images and pictures that were coming out of it, they were hugging each other, they were up close and personal, while in front of the cameras they'll pretend to have a mask on and be like distanced away from each other. But when the cameras are off, they're out there hugging, putting their arms around each other. And it's really sick behavior by these politicians. They make up these rules, and it's just one rule for the rest of us while they are there, breaking their own rules that they put, and it's quite disgusting. And I'm just wondering, why is this guy still in power? So Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, this Lauren and Hardy team, this Dumb and Dumber team, they have systematically destroyed UK step by step by step. They have taken steps every single day which have destroyed the country. They are putting rules which they don't even follow themselves, and it's absolutely disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. And I can understand British people, they're very laid back and they're very pragmatic. However, this is ridiculous. Any other country, you would have seen hundreds of thousands of people protesting on the streets to get these two out of power. But, you know, these two have been allowed to get away doing whatever they're getting away with. And it's all started with Brexit. I mean, I can understand people voting for Brexit because everyone wanted to have their own independence away from Europeans. But did everybody really want to move away from the Europeans and become poodles of the United States instead? Because this is exactly what's happened. They've moved away from the European Union and now become absolute poodles of the United States. Everything that the United States wants from us, we pretty much do. You know, Brexit should have been all about global Britain having its own foreign policy, being independent, being neutral. Boris should have gone to every single country, worked out trade deals with every single country. He should have been on his flight. He did none of that. So instead of Boris going all the way around the world, working out trade deals with different countries, he's flying all the way to Ukraine and giving away British money and weapons for free. And it's absolutely disgusting, because this is the time when we as British need every single penny we can get. And here he is giving money away for free to Ukraine. And, you know, even nurses don't even get a higher pay rise. I mean, last year, nurses who were at the front line of COVID patients only were given a ridiculous 1% pay rise. A ridiculous 1% pay rise. And the government said at the time, we just can't afford to pay any more. However, if you look at the cost of inflation, you know, the cost of inflation has gone up by 8% probably right now. And the 1% pay rise means actually you're actually getting paid less because of the cost of inflation. Everything's gone up. You're actually getting paid less. And it's an absolute joke. He's followed the American policy, whatever Americans wanted him to do, he's pretty much done. And even though we've become absolute poodles of America, America has not actually done anything back for us. We've still not signed any free trade deals, and Biden and Catherine Tai have recently said there's never going to be a free trade deal with UK. So pretty much we're poodles, we're being kicked, but we don't really care because we're just, you know, obedient poodles. Then you got the COVID issue, and obviously COVID is not the government's fault, but what is their fault is them putting rules for everyone else while they're not following their own rules. If you're gonna put lockdowns in the whole country, you need to make sure yourself you lead by example and not get caught having parties and things like that. And again, they followed the American way. The American way to get away from the pandemic. They were printing loads of money. That's exactly what Britain did. They're printing loads of pounds to get themselves out of the pandemic, put them in such a huge debt, and now their debt to GDP level has gone over 100% and really put Britain in a really bad position. And with all of that debt obviously needs to be paid back. So what Rishi Sunak has done, he's increased taxes. He's made life really difficult for average Britons. And not only that, you know, you got inflation rising as well because of all the money printing that's been done. They've pretty much destroyed the supply chains because of Brexit, which made things even worse and made everything more expensive. With regards to the high gas prices and electricity prices, you know, they should have gone after the big, massive companies such as Shell or BP first before getting each and every citizen to pay for higher gas bills and electricity bills, because these companies have been getting away for years, making billions and billions of profit, It's about time, when times are hard, that these companies put a bit of money in to ease the burden to the rest of us. But no, the Tories are all about, helping these huge companies make bigger profits at the expense of the rest of us. So when things are bad, the rest of us have to pay higher taxes, and when the things are good, these companies are making huge profits. And it's just not fair. It's just the way the country is being run. And basically millionaires are getting away with not paying any tax. For example, Rishi Sunak's wife. And I've had a few comments that are saying that Rishi Sunak's wife pays tax for UK businesses. That's not the point. The point is she's a non-domicile and she's getting away paying tax from abroad. And this is one way millionaires get away with paying tax. And people say it's legal. Well, it might be legal, but it's still a loophole. And this is why rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. When you got millionaires living in UK, and she's not even a British citizen. She's in UK. Her kids are going to British schools. She's getting all of the benefits of Britain, and she doesn't have to pay tax on any of her billions that she's got in a bank. A lot of millionaires get away with not paying tax by having their money in tax havens. And if you have them in tax havens, there's many countries around the world which are tax havens. If you have your money there, you don't have to pay any tax on them. And if you're living in Britain, that's it. You got access to that money and not having to worry about paying any tax for it. And it's just not fair. And this is just a tax loophole that a lot of millionaires and billionaires use. They need to get rid of this loophole. Right now, all they are doing is squeezing every single penny, every last penny out of every citizen UK. And it's the poor people who suffer, and it's the middle class who suffer. And it's the middle class who are slowly starting to turn into poverty. And the people who are in poverty are becoming homeless or having nowhere to eat, nowhere to sleep, and freezing to death. Sure, Rishi Sunak's wife has said that she will start paying taxes on her overseas investments, but it's far too little, far too late. And is she going to backdate any of those taxes? I don't think so. It just shows that there's a lot of millionaires that are living in UK who are getting away with not paying any taxes. But this is Tory policies. This is Tory policies in terms of they will want the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer. And you have people like Boris, who's been to private school all his life. He's got no touch with reality. You got Rishi Sunak, who's a millionaire. His wife is a billionaire, and he's running. He's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So he doesn't know anything about how real people struggles are like. How real people live and how real people are struggling. What we need as a Chancellor is someone who knows what real life is about, who's out there struggling to make ends meet, who's struggling to buy food or struggling to pay for the electricity bills. That's what we need the real Chancellor on, so they know exactly what life is like on the ground, rather than living lavishly in your mansion, not having a care in the world about how the rest of Britain is living. It's an absolute joke, and it's an absolute joke. I'm just so surprised people are not protesting in the streets to get these two out of power. However, there is a small issue. There is one reason I'm not protesting out in the streets, because I know who's going to replace them. Rishi Sunak was supposed to be the next Prime Minister, but he's probably blown it with his policies. And there's only one person which everybody else is talking about who can replace Boris Johnson, and that's Liz Truss. And if these two get out of power, only Liz Truss will become the next Prime Minister, and I definitely don't want that. So this is why I'm not protesting out in the streets trying to get these two guys in power, because I know what's coming is much worse. So we're moving to the main part of the story now. There seems to be a lot of false flag events happening lately. So ever since the events at Bucha, you had this story coming out about civilians being killed in Kramatorsk train station when civilians were trying to flee. And then you got this story which I saw today about Russian soldiers raping this woman and killing her husband. And US is deeply concerned about reports of chemical attacks. And then you see stories such as this saying all options on the table if Russia has used chemical weapons in Mariupol. So it seems like a lot of false flag events are happening, and they are pretty much training the West, training the civilians all around Western countries, and trying to basically sell a war with with Russia. So this is what's happening, and you can see it's basically the same sort of playbook that's being played. The same playbook was played in Syria, where they said that the Syrians were using chemical attacks against their own people, and again that was proved false. Then you got stories in Libya saying soldiers were basically taking in Viagra and doing mass rapes. And again, that was proved false as well. And this reminds me very much of the lady who escaped concentration camp in China. She was a Uyghur lady, and she came out saying she got raped by Chinese. And every time she came and did an interview, her story had changed. For example, one minute she got raped. Next time she spoke about the story, she said her friends got raped. And next time she spoke about the story, she said she wasn't raped, and she got abused with some sort of electric buzzer or something. And again, she keeps changing her stories every time she came on board. And the funny thing was, she was a refugee with no money whatsoever, and she was playing around with the £3,000 Apple laptop. And that was her laptop, basically. So you have to ask yourself, how did she afford a £3,000 laptop? Not even I can afford that, living in the West and with my work wages, even my peanuts I get from YouTube. Even I can't afford a £3,000 laptop. And there she is, a refugee, coming from escaping from China, selling a story to the papers, playing around with a £3,000 laptop. And it just goes to show, if people are paid anything, they'll sell any story. That woman did not go through any courts. That woman did not go through any cross-examination. Because when you accuse someone of rape, the British law, you need to go through a series of steps. You need to be examined physically. You need to be cross-examined in a court of law. You need to basically prove that you actually got raped. And these stories are coming out. Anyone can say they got raped without any proof out there. So whatever happened to this lady, I'm not denying it. I'm not saying she's making it up. I'm just saying there needs to be a proper examination. There needs to be an independent inquiry. There needs to be somebody who can check her stories, collaborate her stories, and check her physically, and just go through the proper process before you accuse people of rape. And I think it's very, very important. A lot of these Western papers are eating up stories like this. But what about the atrocities that Ukrainian soldiers are doing to the Russians? What about all of the atrocities that the Azov militants did to the Donbass for the past 8 to 10 years? Where are those stories? It's not going to be in the papers because it's not part of the narrative. So you see, all of these stuff is just basically anti-Russian stuff. They're not going to say anything bad about Ukraine. And so what I'm saying is there needs to be an independent inquiry before you start accusing people and before you start accusing countries. For example, this story about Kramatorsk railway station, there's stories circulating that the missile used was not a Russian missile. It's actually a missile used by the Ukrainian soldiers, by the Azov militants. And again, they're not going to report anything like that. I mean, it doesn't make sense why Russia would fire at a crowded train station. I just want to show you this clip first of all, and then I will kind of get back into this.
Четко и ясно нас обстреливала украинская армия, украинские батальоны. Мэр города Мариуполя Бойченко в открытую призывал делать коктейли Молотова и бросать в российских военных.
Take a listen to what he sent us a day ago.
People are cooking food in the streets, risking their lives under the continuing shellings.
Все аптеки перебиты, все магазины, все везде перебито. Они приезжают, среди дворов ставят автоматы, вернее, эти пулеметы, вот эти непонятные, я не знаю, вот этих я ну, как бы не могу ответить конкретно, какие снаряды. Но факт тот, что вот они приехали во дворах, там, где школы, там, где люди. Они оттуда вас стреляют, я не знаю, мне просто нет слов.
And the temperature is -5 degrees Celsius in the street. Killing the civilian, the amount of victims grows every day.
Никаких коридоров.
В подвалах сидим.
Азов, сука, выезжали люди, Азов, блядь, расстреливал пидорасы, сука. Что Азов делал? Расстреливал колонны, блядь, мирных, нахуй, пытались выезжать на Володарск, расстреливали автобусы, блядь.
Now it is more than 3,000, but nobody knows the exact amount because people are buried together in the same tomb with no names.
Украинская армия не помогала?
Украинская армия стреляла.
Many bodies are just outside the streets without being buried. Some of people are under the ruined buildings buried alive. Ukrainian army is trying to help civilians with food and water.
У нас нету ни связи, ни воды, ни тепла. У нас ничего нету, мы ничего не знаем. По слухам, нам сказали, что там вывозят, там есть коридор. Наш двор какой-то, как будто медом намазан. Вот приедут, постреляют, отъедут. Потом опять приедут, обстреляют, едут. Как живой щит? Мы как живой щит были. Что нас спрашивают, что мы хотим? Мы хотим мира.
But it's not enough. There is no safety places for people in Mariupol.
Люди бедные, те, которым у них нечем выехать, у них нету транспорта. Мы уезжали, они плакали, они рыдали. Им просто нету транспорта, нечем выехать. Выезда никакого официального нет. Мы на свой страх и риск. Вот, нам сказали, что можно сегодня выехать. Мы собрались в 2 секунды. Самое необходимое, вот так вот позакидывали в машину и поехали.
The missiles of the enemy are attacking the houses and people are dying in their beds.
Это в одном только доме.
Почему вы раньше не выехали?
А нас никто не выпускала.
Моя соседка забрала маму свою с 23-го микрорайона. Сказали, что да, они зашли, 2 девятиэтажки, они полностью людей выселили и сами туда заселились. Люди с пакетами поуходили все, со слезами на глазах, искать какие-то себе убежища.
Скажите, где?
Как украинские военные к вам относились, украинские военные?
Там, уже я рассказывала, как. Зверски, понимаете?
Можно несколько примеров вот повторить?
Ну смотрите, нет еще русских ребят, нет никого, да?
Да.
Заперли нас в подвалы, и вот это над нами, в дома лупят, танки откуда еще.
So you can see from the stories from the ground how Azov militants are shooting unarmed civilians, they're shooting fleeing civilians, they're not letting the civilians leave, and they're using schools and other places as battlegrounds. And you can see from people they're actually telling the real story. So it's very plausible. Obviously I don't have any evidence because, like I said, there needs to be an independent inquiry, but it's very much plausible that the Azov militants could have fired at this train station to kill these civilians who are leaving, because these civilians have said that Azov militants are shooting civilians that flee. They're not allowed to flee, basically. So it could have been very, very plausible that Azov have shot this train station and then blamed you on the Russians. And it's easy for them to do that because you see all of the West is completely against Russia, and any stories like this, they will eat you up and say, oh, don't worry about any evidence, we'll just say the Russians did it, and that's it. People will just eat you up. And that seems to me what's happening at the moment. And they are escalating these false flag events, you know, day by day by day. But they can see the amount of media coverage that was on Bucha. They can see the amount of media coverage that's on Kramatorsk as well. And basically, they are just eating all of that up. And they're going to do it more and more. So it's escalating now. Then you got stories about this woman. Then you have stories about Russia using chemical attacks. And I feel that America or NATO, you know, will look at these chemical attacks and give the go-ahead to get involved somehow. And I just think it sounds to me that this war is somehow escalating, and this could escalate in a bigger world war. And I just hope it doesn't happen, but it does sound like it's heading that way, just because of all of these false flag events that's happening, all of these articles about Russia using chemical weapons when there's no evidence whatsoever. Like I said, these are the same people who said Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. These are the same people who said that Syrians are using chemical weapons on each other. They said that Libya was doing the same thing, and they're using these pretexts as a way to, basically fool the public into having a war, and and they're doing the same thing over and over again. I'm just surprised that people are not fooled by it all, because you see it all the time happening. You've seen this from Iraq, you've seen it in Syria, you've seen it in Libya, seen it in Afghanistan. It just happens over and over again. They use the same sort of playbook, they use the same tactic, and it's just, it's like a manual they use, and it's like a step-by-step guide. And they're doing all of these same steps all over again. Every single time they want war, they just follow the same procedure. As you can see, a lot of these stories have already found Russia guilty of war crimes. However, there's no proof. There's no hard proof. The only hard proof that was released was by WikiLeaks. And you can see WikiLeaks released 400,000 classified documents of the Iraq war, showing how civilians were killed in Iraq by US soldiers. And you can see this guy here. So this guy, Daniel Hale, was sentenced to 45 months in prison because he said that 9 out of these 10 drone attacks killed civilians. And you can see that's a huge amount. 9 out of 10 drone attacks killed civilians. And because he released this kind of information, he got put into jail for 45 months. And you can see what's happened to Assange as well. So people who actually spread the truth and speak the truth get sent to jail. But the reporters who report fake news or anything that goes along with the narrative or anything that the government wants you to report, then you get promoted. And this is exactly what's showing with all of these stories. So I'm not saying all of this is pure fabrication. Obviously, you're in a war, so things can happen on both sides. However, Western papers love to put the Russians as the bad guys in this, and all they are reporting is Russian war crimes. They're not looking at any evidence, they're not looking at any independent inquiry, they're just quick to put the blame all on Russia. I miss the days when reporters used to do their job, when journalism meant something, you are actually trying to speak the truth. And I miss those days. And nowadays reporters or journalists, they don't do any homeworks, they don't check for the facts. They don't have any independent person verifying any claims or any stories. They just go along with the narrative. The editor tells them what to write, and they said, look, write a story about Russia killing civilians in this train station, write a story about Russia using chemical weapons, and don't worry, you don't need any proof, you don't need any evidence. And that's the way the West has been working over the past 10-20 years. But a lot of people who have seen this, they can see the same playbook being played every single time. So when it was the Iraq war, you had that young 15-year-old girl crying on the world stage, saying that Saddam Hussein's troops were basically taking babies out of incubators and killing them, and all sorts of horror stories, and she was crying about it. And the whole world was basically being primed to go into Iraq. And later on, it was found out that this girl was actually the Kuwaiti diplomat's daughter, and she made everything up. And again, by the time this story came out, it was all too late. America had already gone into Iraq, destroyed countless homes, killed countless people. And it was all too late after that. The truth will eventually come out, but the thing is, it comes out at a time when nobody really cares anymore. And that's how they work, you know, just spread as many stories as you can now. And even if the truth comes out later, it doesn't really matter. We'll put in the middle of our, you know, newspaper somewhere that, you know, all of that was fake, but by then it's too late. You know, that's how they work. And you can see by some of the wordings that these journalists use. Basically, instead of saying, oh, this is a accusation by the Ukrainians or something, they'll use words such as Russia has definitely used chemical attacks, you know, Russia has definitely done this, definitely done that, definitely destroyed all of these people in these in a crowded station in eastern Ukraine. They'll basically use words such as that to show that Russia is the main perpetrator of these war crimes, and that's always how it's going to be. That's always how it's going to be. I mean, Russia is the main perpetrator. Russia is the main evil person here. Russia is the one that's doing all of these evil crimes, not Ukraine. So as an example, I want to show you an article from the Financial Times. It says, the Russian missile attack on Kramatorsk railway station that killed 50 people, 5 of them children. And you can see they've already placed blame on Russia without going through any independent inquiry, without going through any facts on the ground. And I remember Financial Times used to be a serious paper, and it used to be for intellectuals in UK who are in the business, in the financial business, or if you are an intellect and you think you've got a bit of brain, then you would read the Financial Times. And I remember sitting on the train, and if there was a person opposite me reading the Financial Times, you would immediately assume this guy is an intellect, this guy, you know, is rich, or he's a businessman, he has got really good brains. And if you look at a person reading The Sun, you would immediately assume that this guy has no brains, this guy has got no intellect. And there's papers in the UK like The Sun, The News of the World, The Express. You know, they assume that British people have no brains, so some of these articles are ridiculous. So you can understand them writing ridiculous articles day by day. But what you don't, you know, expect is the Financial Times going along those lines as well. And Financial Times recently has been very, very unintellectual in terms of their reporting. You know, they are very, very biased. And it's a shame, really. And I just always used to think that they were an intellectual paper, but now I just think they're just like the rest of them. And it's a shame how, you know, the mighty have fallen, really. I also want to show you this podcast as well. And there's this podcast, the BBC Radio, how there's millions of people who actually listen to the radio every day. They go to work, if they're in the car, they put the radio on. And some of them have genuine questions about why Russia's gone into Ukraine. And apparently, you know, this podcast has apparently brought in a couple of experts from Ukraine and Russia. And people are asking questions about why Russia's gone in. And again, these people are just brainwashing the public. You know, they don't mention anything about NATO. They don't mention anything about reasons why Putin's gone in. They don't mention anything about the atrocities in Donbass. You know, I made a video about the 10 main reasons why Russia's gone in, and they don't mention any of those reasons. All they talk about is Putin's a madman. He's gone in for absolutely no apparently reason. So I want to kind of show you this podcast really, and let you kind of think for yourself.
From his hands. Hello, it's Gabriel in the studio here in London.
Vitaly Shevchenko, also in the studio in London.
And I'm Jackie Leonard of the Global News Podcast, and I am also in the studio in London.
Welcome, Jackie. We're doing things a bit differently today. You're here with us. We're kind of piggybacking on your huge global podcast, which is listened to by millions and millions and millions of people. So we're quite excited about that. And we are going to be answering questions from listeners about Ukraine and the conflict from around the world.
You are. We asked our listeners what it was they wanted to know. They sent in huge numbers of questions. We will definitely not get to all of them, but I really hope that you can shed some light on what's been going on.
Yeah, and I'll be really interested to get the perspective of listeners from lots of different corners of the globe. But But you're basically running this show now, Jackie, so why don't you sort of take over the reins?
Well, that being the case, please, for the benefit of our listeners, introduce yourselves and what you do.
I'm Vitaly Shevchenko. I'm a Russia editor at BBC Monitoring, but I'm from Eastern Ukraine.
And I'm Gabriel Gatehouse. I am a BBC foreign correspondent for many years. I've been based all around the world. I'm now the international editor for a programme called Newsnight, but really my background and my heart is in Russia and Ukraine. I've spent many years looking at that part of the world.
Well, we asked Global News Pod listeners for their questions about what's going on, and they sent in a great many of them. So let us press on. Events are continuing to move very fast in Ukraine. As we record this podcast, it's day 13 of the Russian invasion. We spent nearly 2 weeks watching extraordinary images of devastation being rained down upon Ukrainian cities, hearing the voices of those affected, and seeing an exodus of more than 2 million people so far, desperately trying to escape towards the west. Time to try and answer some of the many questions sent in. Given the shock of it all, quite a lot of people still want to know why. Let's begin with Anthony Torres in New York.
What are the motivations behind Putin's invasion of Ukraine? And how is he trying to rewrite the past in order to justify violence in the present and thus control the future?
Hi, I'm Bart and I'm writing in from Leeds, UK. And the question I have is, why did President Putin decide to invade Ukraine now rather than any other time?
My name is Tessa and I'm a master's student living in Berlin, Germany. What does the timing of these escalations imply about Putin's goals?
Well, I mean, it's so difficult to answer this question, mainly because I and many, many others, most of the people that I know that know the most about Putin and the Kremlin and Russia, we didn't see this coming, right? We were completely blindsided by it, as were, I believe, I've got this from decent sources, people around Putin. So I should caveat all of this by saying, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think what we've learned from the fact that he did this, and he did this without apparently consulting even many of those closest to him in the Kremlin, is that his calculus of what he wants to achieve, we thought he wanted to achieve a Ukraine as a sort of non-NATO member buffer state between Russia and NATO. He wanted to achieve a seat at the top table with the Americans. Maybe that's not what he wants to achieve. Maybe he actually believes his own propaganda, that he's fighting this kind of Nazi threat in Ukraine. They were saying that, you know, the Ukrainian government was a neo-Nazi regime. They needed to denazify Ukraine. Now, of course, this is complete nonsense, but nevertheless, this is the propaganda message that the Russians have been putting forward.
Looking at what had been happening before the war, I did get the feeling that things are about to get really, really tense and difficult. And the answer to the question of why did Putin attack Ukraine now is, I think, is because he felt the moment was right. And he had spent months preparing for this. He had achieved a situation when realistically, there's no force within Russia, there's no political party or political leader who could challenge him on any of the policy issues. The most important and prominent opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, is in jail. His organization, called the Anti-Corruption Foundation, is banned. Almost all independent media in Russia have been banned or blocked. There are curbs on social media as well. So it feels as though Putin thought, the time is right, I can do it now.
As you can see from that podcast, you know, they must think people are really stupid because, you know, some of these guys, they're just saying, oh, Putin thought the time is right, let's just do it now. None of them gone through any reasons why Putin's did it. None of them went through any reasons why Russia's did it. You know, the 10 main reasons I was talking about, things like NATO expansion, things like, you know, the atrocities the Ukrainians were doing in Donbass, for example, you know, all of the stuff going on with Crimea and the Minsk agreement, none of that, you know, these guys were talking about. And these are so-called experts about Russia and Ukraine. And you can see the kind of filth that the British public are being fed on a daily basis on the radio, on newspapers. And this is why so many people are brainwashed in Britain, because you are constantly fed this kind of information. You're fed that Russia's a bad guy. It's gone in for no apparent reason. Putin's gone in because he's got an ego and he wants to do it now for no apparently reason whatsoever. And this is it. And a lot of people are falling for it. You know, when you see all of this stuff every single day on papers, on the news, on radio, a lot of people will start to believe it. And unfortunately, this is how it is in Britain. A lot of people are believing all of this filth and all of these lies. And I just can't believe it. I just can't believe people are still falling for it, even though a lot of people that have gone through life, you know, looking at all of the lies that's happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria, people are still falling for it. And it's the same people falling for it over and over again. And it's sad to see, unfortunately. It's very, very sad to see. Anyway, that's all I have time for, unfortunately. Let me know what you guys think of the video, and let's discuss it further in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and you can also join my Patreon or buy me a coffee. Thanks very much, and I'll see you soon.